The first time I saw William H. Gass was from my living room window. I had just moved across the street from Bill. He was getting into a very small, very, very small car. Honestly, I didn't think he was going to fit. I learned later he called it the Tin Can. He loved that car because it got him where he wanted to go. Nothing more, no pretentious, no statement. It was 1987. I had just finished a series of images of a crumbling forest park. I wanted a book published that might create an awareness of how much our park had been diminished by neglect. The publisher felt I would need an introduction and would be best if it was from a St. Louis writer. I knew one nearby. I knew a little of Bill's work. In retrospect, that was probably a good thing, had I known that there was a God living across the street, I probably would not have contacted him. I called 411. Remember that? I asked for the listing of a William H. Gass. I called the number. I still have it memorized after 30 years. Bill answered the phone. Hello. I remember his voice to be soft, to be kind, but Bill didn't like to talk much on the phone, so it was me that mostly spoke. I told him who I was, that I lived across the street. I could have waved to him if he had been near a window. I could drop off some photographs, I said, if he was interested. I did not know how presumptuous it was to ask William Gass to write for me. Sometimes naivete is the best approach. Bill called a few days later to say that he would be thrilled to write about the park. He too loved Forest Park. He asked if I would want to come by and we could discuss the book. It is still one of the best phone calls I've ever received. We set up a time to meet. It said that every journey begins with a single step. It took me 25 to make it across the street. I had done a bit of research about my new neighbor. I discovered how passionate, how fierce, intense, and fiery Bill could be. I learned how respected he was. His lectures were almost always to overflow audience. He was a rock star. A few weeks later, I told Mary that I had been surprised how kind Bill was to me, so warm, so gentle. I didn't know he was like that. She said, he isn't. He believes in what you're doing. And that was the beginning of a 30-year friendship and collaboration, which is one of the defining relationships of my life. The Forgotten Forest was published in 1988. Bill's essay was brilliant. We worked on over 25 projects over the years, including an online book, book covers, photographs for essays, portraits of Writers Center, portraits of Bill, a photographic illustration of the tunnel, and many, many others. And there were hundreds of lunches. I love those conversations, for we talked about everything. Art, artists, writers, philosophy, what we were working on, the state of the world, and of course, the greatest show on earth, the St. Louis Rams. He loved that team. He loved excellence. In an attempt to better understand Bill's work, I remember asking one of his friends, Red Watson, about Bill's writing. Red asked me, have you ever read a book where you could not wait to turn the page? To see what happens next? The words are invisible. It's all about the story. Red said, with Bill Gass, it's the opposite. Bill's writing had little to do with the story. It was all about the words, the beauty of the language, the structure, the form of the text. One of the first things that struck me when I walked into Bill and Mary's home was their collections of sculptural found objects. Ready-mades everywhere, Deschamps. It was like a museum of their experiences, their travel, their passion, their history, and their shared vision. And everywhere there were Bill's photographs. They were mostly of color urban abstractions, formal compositions of beautifully weathered surfaces, faded by the sun and by neglect. There were very old signs with faded letters and peeling paint, secret messages. These photographs were chronicles of our cities and of our past. They were recordings of a human presence. They were extraordinary. Photographs, by definition, are about time. He loved to photograph. I think for him, photography was a way of recording his observation, which would later inform his writing. I knew I was not qualified to discuss his writing. Few are. But we shared a different kind of language, a visual language, and we both loved photography. We talk about form and line and color and surface and composition, and we talked about beauty. It was a time in the world when beauty was under attack in the art world. Bill strongly believed in the importance of beauty, both in art and in the world. For a young artist, this was so helpful to me. He wrote an essay that featured some of my photographs. "It's Okay to Be Beautiful" was the title. In part, his essay was about his belief that the world had a capacity to absorb as much art as we could create. There was no limit on greatness, he would say. And what a wonderful way to look at the world. I miss our talks. He became my mentor, although I'm sure he would have humbly disagreed, but he encouraged me. He felt making art in St. Louis was both a blessing and a curse. It was great to not have all the interruptions and distractions, and yet difficult to not have the recognition and support that a larger city might provide. In the end, I didn't need much more support than Bill Gass. As a writer, he understood doubt and how it could be used to motivate us. He knew disappointment, success, rejection, recognition. He talked about his career, his hopes, his fears. He was amazingly open. Bill shared all he knew gladly. Over the years, I would look across the street up to Bill's studio above his carport. In the early evenings, I would see his white head silhouetted against his computer screen as he worked on something new. He worked all the time. His work ethic inspired me, inspired everybody. He would say, "It's all about the work." Our relationships changed slightly. I would still bring him over new work, but I started to feel a sense of urgency. I worked more so I would have more to show him. Much of what I was doing in the end was for Bill. Towards the end of his life, his ability to work became compromised. He was not writing much, and I know how deeply it affected him. He never complained. His dignity and grace shone brightly. I was so pleased for him that he could continue to work for as long as he did. It meant so much to him to continue writing in the hope of creating another great work. What a legacy for us all. Thank you.